it's great when you see a movie, you think, oh, this is cool, and then you get into all this stuff we've been talking about, and you come back to a movie like this, and you think, oh my God, there's so much stuff that's there, but I just didn't notice it. And then you've got this vocabulary in your mind to sort of reinterpret the movie with, and it just opens it up so much more. So that happened for me, and I thought, oh man, we got an instant talker. So
it seems to be a whole class of movies that have these sort of a network of gems in a certain vein of esoteric thinking that we seem to be grabbing onto. The thing that I find interesting is that there are some patterns that tend to come up and repeat, to recur, you could say, in the movies that we talk about. I mean, in this one, for example, one of the fairly blatant motifs is something we talked about in the Blade Runner discussion, where something comes in from nowhere and disrupts how things were, right? So we tend to sort of hit on these notes, which I think is interesting because we're looking at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a theory about sort of there's this Hollywood vocabulary that people like. There's a reason why all this stuff shows up, and I really do think it's
Illuminati.
largely because, well, I think a big part of it is Joseph Campbell's influence, and I say that because he was a guest speaker at this institute called the Esalen Institute out in California. I think it's in Big Sur, and knowing his connection,
McKenna was big there as well.
Yeah, I think maybe Alan Watts was there as well. I mean, he seems like a guy that would show up there, but yeah. So Campbell, Watts, McKenna, all these people were influential out there at around the same time, I suppose. I mean, McKenna later for sure, but that band of people ties you into people like Carl Jung and Mircea Eliade, and so it just seems to make sense to me that if you're out there in California at the time, working in Hollywood, working in the entertainment industry, that these ideas are going to be kicked around and floating around a lot because it's just in the zeitgeist of the time. And so I think that's might be why a lot of this stuff crops up in so many movies and so much stuff that's still influential, and we're still seeing it all today. So that's kind of
the stuff
where
that
I
has
attack it with.
The stuff that has, I agree. I think the stuff that has sort of lasting effects, especially the stuff inside of it, which makes it feel or resonate far into the future. I mean, Donnie Darko is a fairly old movie, but it seems perfectly valid. It doesn't seem very dated at all, even though it's set in '88, right? I think I agree, but we're coming at it from a different perspective. We didn't really know we were doing that at first, but we seem to be grabbing hold of some threads or something and realizing slowly that we're actually finding a set of ideas or memes that exist in a web that may if we keep following it along, we might see those guys just sort of sitting next to a tree or something at some point. And maybe they'll invite us for a picnic or something. But we seem to be tugging at some sort of a sweater thread that I'm not quite sure where it leads.
Yeah, we're going to see like Schopenhauer sitting behind, like the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I don't know, but that you're giving Schopenhauer a lot of credit. I think he deserves a lot of credit, but I'm not sure if he's the guy behind the curtain.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I think he's probably working the levers with a few other key figures. Maybe we'll get into that.
I mean, it's funny to see how much of this content moves through the period of, I think it's called German Romanticism, which is what I think like Schopenhauer and Jung and Freud and Nietzsche and all these guys sort of partook in.
Goethe.
And
if you go back,
which
I mean, they were influenced by, because they all reference Faust, and so there's it goes all the way back. That could be the epicenter, maybe. It's also giving Goethe a lot of credit as well.
Yeah, I think that was called a Ursprung. I think means like origin. It's like original place where it came from in German. Fun fact.
maybe
useless,
but fun.
Yes.
Maybe we could start as we do with the broad context for those watching. I think we have to throw people a bone. We tend to not make it, I think, easy, very super accessible sometimes. But I think doing the sort of big picture overview like we did for Blade Runner, in my mind, that's useful for people watching. So,
Yeah.
do you want to take a whack at it?
Sure. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like saying you must be at least this dopey to ride this ride. So
Right.
let's help
Yeah.
people out.
Yeah.
Um,
The
yeah,
6'8" version of dopiness. That's where the line is.
the what?
The 6'8" version of, if dopiness equates to height, it would be 6'8" would be the minimum line. It was a
Absolutely.
poorly executed joke. I apologize.
You should have waited for my cough to finish, and then it would have been funny.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Donnie Darko takes place in 1988. It's an election year. I think that's very important for the film. Dukakis and George Bush Senior, and so, yeah, it takes place in Middlesex, and I think it's a real place, or there are real places called Middlesex in England and also in the Northeast United States. So I don't know which. I didn't catch if it might be a specific one, but our hero of the story is a teenage boy, Donnie, and he lives in this town. It's an election year. It's coming up on Halloween, and he has a problem with sleepwalking. So he's taking meds, and his family life is, I don't know, I feel like it's fairly normal. It doesn't seem incredibly shaken up, broken, or anything like that. Things seem kind of in the middle. I think that's important. And his sister is applying for college. He's got a younger sister. His mom and dad are in the home, and he's having some trouble at school.
But he's
so
very smart. He's very intelligent. He's brilliant.
Yeah. His Iowa test scores are intimidating, as his principal says. And so he's a real smart kid, but he's sort of dissatisfied with the world around him. He thinks it's all fake. Like it's people are trying to simplify things, and he has this big brain. And so he's thinking, oh, life is more complex than just divvying things up into two categories. So he doesn't fit in, and he's struggling with that. It's a coming of age story as well. I think Bildungsroman is the German word for that, which is, I mean, it's an important thing to bring up because, again, we're talking about that lineage of stories and this type of thing. So anyway, he's seeing this, he's having these daytime visions of this being dressed in a rabbit suit with a sort of death mask on its face. And it's the popular image from the movie, from the trailer, from the posters and everything. And weird things start happening. He starts.
That song is also by an artist called Echo and the Bunnymen. The first song in
the Killing Moon. Ah, yeah.
Bunnymen.
I looked that song up last night, and it didn't even hit me. Bunnymen. The second you start digging into this movie, you just get all this great self-referential stuff, and it's a treasure trove. So anyway, I think we're going to get into a lot of that. Surprisingly, I mean, when I saw it as I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I thought, oh, this is cool. But then watching it now with more of a vocabulary for this kind of thing, it just, it opens up and opens up. So it's fantastically deep film. Anyway, so yeah, Donnie meets a girl. Like I said, it's a coming of age story. So they're kind of figuring each other out, a little bit of romance there. And he's got some enemies in school, a typical coming of age story. So I think that will set up the premise without giving it away too many details. What do you think? Anything?
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. I think it's good that you pointed out that it's happening during an election, which I don't think is just to give it a timeline, but is probably pretty intentional. As for his family situation, at the beginning of the movie, you get sort of inklings that maybe this is going to be one of those teen angst, I hate you mom sort of movies, but it ultimately doesn't really turn out to be that to that degree. His parents turn out to be pretty solid people who, generally speaking, support their kid and kind of are able to encompass his growth rather than stifle it. I mean, it's not that clear, but that's a direction that I think is also pretty relevant. So I'm sure we'll get into that stuff too. Maybe we could just start with the sleepwalking stuff, and also then the early onset, possibly early onset schizophrenia. His counselor or his shrink suggests that he might have the early stages or some schizophrenic characteristics that are starting to develop in addition to his sleepwalking. So, that I think leads to a conversation about not only the coming of age initiation into adulthood, but the other type of initiation, which is classically as a schizophrenic, the shamanic initiation, right? So maybe I don't know if it's too early to get into that stuff, but I think it's pretty relevant and it carries through the movie. So maybe it is a good time.
Yeah. It kind of starts out with, let's do it. I think the shamanism theme is pretty important, and it starts off with that kind of. So, do you want me to take a crack at it, or do you want to go for it, or how do you want to set it up?
Well, I would say the initiation of a person into adulthood in a lot of ways parallels the initiation of a young shaman into the trials that will lead to them becoming a shaman or not, and except magnified to a pretty extreme degree, which it is here as well. But it's often in the Eliade book, it's often characterized as isolation, wanting to be on your own, isolation from the tribe. Symptoms like an illness, a severe illness, schizophrenia being a good candidate for that sort of thing. Maybe over self-awareness, being hyper-aware of oneself, but then having not a guide like a mentor in a shop teaching you how to make things, but a sort of guide who's traveled the road before, who can drop breadcrumbs that you can follow. Although each journey is different, we see a character who may be this person for him. Mrs. Sparrow, who's this old lady, has this book, and so there is a road that has been traveled, but it's not exactly his road, but there is still some precedent. So those two things overlap a lot. I want to get into it in more depth, but I also want to hear what you think, sort of a big picture.
Yeah, so I was going to say the opening shot or the opening scene is Donnie waking up on a mountain from, he's laying in the middle of the road. He wakes up, looks around, gets on his bike, then he goes back into town, and that's kind of when the day or the movie starts. So, so he's sleepwalking, and he's taking medication to help with the sleepwalking. When he gets home, there's a note on the fridge after he comes down from the mountain. It says, "Where's Donnie?" So this is a thing. This is a recurring thing, and so it's like, what do we do with that? So everything you said about what Eliade said in the book 100% applies to the movie. And so the thing that Eliade says makes a shaman distinct from other functionaries in a tribe, a priest, a magician, anybody else, is their ability to access the ecstatic experience. Other people can't do it. Shaman can enter into an ecstatic trance. And so sleepwalking in the film is Donnie's ability to access the ecstatic state. And a shaman in an ecstatic state can meet other beings. It could be heavenly beings, it could be infernal beings, it could be one of the things that Eliade talks about is a tutelary spirit. And the tutelary spirit, there's another type, but I think it's the tutelary spirit can take the form of different beings and sometimes animals, I think. And so in Donnie Darko, Donnie's tutelary spirit is this rabbit, and the rabbit talks to Donnie, gives him information about the future, about himself, about time travel, sort of these veiled uh, dark omens and all that kind of stuff. So it's and all of these things are in Mircea Eliade's book Shamanism. All there's examples of all these phenomenons that took place in.
They're not all exactly the same. There are a lot of variations too.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's tons. It does seem like in the movie they cherry picked some examples to, make a good film. So that's Donnie's connection to shamanism. And there's more. There's definitely more. I think if we're just trying to lay out the case that, okay, this movie has a big connection to shamanism, I think that'll help sort of give us some credibility what we're talking about.
I think it's pretty clear and pretty blatant. But the other things that come out of that book by Eliade is that there's the sanction of the village. In other words, there's a recognition that while there is fear of this shaman sometimes, there is also the need for the shaman, potentially as a medicine man, potentially as someone who can forecast the weather and the movements of animals and so on, or decide who not to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so in a way, you would expect a teen angst movie to be kid versus the world, but at every stage, there are these figures who act in a way that supports his furthering his movement into the ecstatic or toward this wherever he's going, right? Let's say becoming a shaman. His parents, his father, seems to understand what's going on and thinks what his son is doing is cool, not the sort of stereotypical teen angst movie dad, right? He thinks it's great, but also his English teacher, his science teacher, and it seems like everything that happens validates the usefulness of what he's doing, so that it's not the thing that differentiates it from a normal teen angst story is that every time he takes an action, it's validated by the consequences. He burned down a house. Oh, it's a pedophile's house. There's his porn cave. So every time he does it, it creates a positive movement for most people. And there are these figures who seem to be sort of being pulled along by his wake and act as a little push to help him go further. And that's kind of where the tribe goes in this process, in which the new shaman could very well die during the process. But so there's this relationship of discomfort / we need this person, and it's that sort of walking the edge between order and chaos, which the shaman represents, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I think it'd be cool to bring up based off what you just said. So when Donnie does a thing based on his sort of his shamanic his trance experience, he learns something new and then he takes action based on what Frank the rabbit has told him. There's positive things that happen, and there's also negative things that happen, and I think that's what leads Donnie to make his ultimate decision in the end, is because he can. And we can come back to that. I think we will. Crap, what was the last thing he said? What was the last thing he said?
The tribe, in a way, providing room for the development of the shaman and order and chaos.
Order and chaos. So I think it might be worth exploring maybe setting the tone even more for why Donnie being a shaman is important. So we talked about the election year.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up next, so that's good. We should bring that in, I think.
Okay. Cool.
Good.
So the election year in the movie, it's 1988, like we said, Dukakis and Bush. And what we're coming to, which is indicative of the state of the entire movie, is we're coming to sort of this fork in the road. It's a very unstable period in the United States because it's an election year. It's an unstable period in the children's lives because they're going through puberty. Um, and there's just a lot of instability in each of the characters we meet. There's a big shift coming. There's a big change coming. An apocalypse, essentially, a revealing of a new state, the death of the old, the initiation of the new. We're in a state of chaos in order to bring about a rebirth of a new state. So, like in an election year, you have the old passing away and the new coming in. So everybody's grappling with this level of insecurity, and so that's signified by the election year, by all the kids, going through puberty and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's other things. They're eluding me right now, but can you think of the other stuff?
Well, there are events that happen throughout, like the tension between the teachers, the principal, and Mrs. Farmer, and these two younger teachers who represent a better understanding of young people and a willingness to get on their level and educate them in a different way. So you have the sort of the old guard represented by whatever the principal's name is and Mrs. Farmer, and then they're battling against the new. The new doesn't necessarily win in the movie, but they represent these two sides of a status quo and something that's coming, which is going to overturn the status quo. But there's also a sense that I think we'll get into that too, of the status quo holding on so tightly that it's cracking beneath the surface. You can see that in Mrs. Farmer's face. This sort of thing shows the cracks beneath the surface of the old needing to be replaced by the new, which is that same motif that we talked about with Blade Runner. It's this then a jet engine falls from the sky and makes things it's a meteor. Yeah,
which is like the thundercrack in Ulysses, the James Joyce, which is also another big coming of age story that a lot of movies reference. But you have the big, so like their home is generally peaceful and sound, and it's fairly secure. Donnie and his family, and then you get this giant event that happens, a thundercrack, a big boom that just destroys everything. Everything is then broken and shaken apart. So all of this sort of tension of, oh my God, we're at this point, this fork in the road, like what's going to happen? This is the event that sort of determines or explodes the new horizon, and sort of people having to suddenly adapt. What punctuated equilibrium, kind of they have to adapt to a new state, and it kind of sets it sets Donnie further down the road of shamanhood, because he later in the movie says that Frank saved his life. And how did Frank save his life? Well, Frank saved Donnie's life by waking him up in the middle of the night to come out to the golf course and being on the golf course instead of in his room when the jet engine falls through. So then Donnie feels like he owes Frank his life and he's got to obey Frank. And so that sets his whole trajectory off on the shamanistic path.
And I think we'll get into the fate part of that as well. I think we both probably want to talk about Nietzsche a little bit, but just on that line of thinking. So, if someone hasn't seen the movie, essentially when his rabbit guide tells him to come out to the golf course and saves his life from the airplane engine falling from the sky and landing in his room, a reality is created, but it's kind of it's a reality that's going to eventually loop back and collapse on itself. It's not a stable reality, and so, but it's almost as though it were a moss or a lichen sort of moving forward and putting its tendrils outward. There is a cultural shift taking place, and it's sort of reaching forward, and where it finds success, it moves in that direction. So this is like one of those that maybe pulls back, but it still learns something that then is integrated into the body as it continues to sort of spread outward, right? Like a mycelium. But also, I wanted to bring up something on the airplane engine that falls out of the sky. it seems like, why make that the event? Joyce's thunderclap, but also I think the symbolism of the meteorite is pretty relevant too, as a thing on the ground, but also as a thing that falls from the sky. So when people would see an asteroid in the sky, it's a thing in the heavens that wasn't there before. So it's always static. Sometimes there are shooting stars, but now there's a thing in the sky that wasn't there before. So obviously, it portends all kinds of things. It implies an eschatology because it's new, and so it must mean something. And I'm just thinking in terms of the archaic mindset, right? So if that's the case, the meteor falling from the sky sort of represents a kind of new state, a potential new state, a bifurcation where you could go either left or right. And I remembered reading something on this. I think it was von Franz, who was one of Jung's proteges. I believe it was her. She wrote something about how a meteorite itself represents a neutral state. And a neutral state is a place of stasis, but the meteorite itself represents the option to go either left or right. So, okay, a new thing has come down. Now, what are you going to do with the new thing? Previously, all the variables were static. So there's no new thing, so the status quo remains. Now a new thing appears that is not part of this world. Will you go left or will you go right? Will you return to the status quo and reinforce it and do another cycle of the status quo, or will you break it and will you do something else? And then I think in the same thing, or maybe it was something else, I also remember that the meteor and the bowl that it creates, or the impact crater that it creates, could be representative of the Grail. And in fact, that the Grail was supposed to be a gem that fell from Satan's crown when he fell from heaven, and it landed on the earth. So in some stories that I've heard, the stone from Satan's crown, which became the Grail, was not a Grail, but was actually a meteor, which also then represents sort of a new state. So I thought that was very interesting but the stone then became the Grail because of the shape of the impact crater. That might be a stretch. I remember reading that. It might be a stretch. I remember reading it a long time ago, but I do think that's an interesting point to raise, just because, it does represent that choice and a new thing that can be used as fodder for potential change, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I totally forgot and missed the jet engine being like a meteorite, because in Patterns and Comparative Religion, Eliade talks a lot about meteorites and the significance that they had for more archaic ancient peoples.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a cratophany or a hierophany, which means a phenomenon of power. Cratophany or cratophany, and hierophany meaning a phenomenon of the holy. So yeah, it's those events were considered important, holy, spiritual, special, and the places where those objects fell were then venerated. They were then holy themselves. So yeah, for sure, that's a really cool
Mecca
catch.
being one. Mecca being one of those.
Yeah, what's the name of the this is the Kaaba? Is that what it is?
Kaaba, yeah, I think that sounds right. That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a stone that fell from the sky, and it is the center of the circumambulating place of, yeah.
Another couple of details I wanted to bring up, if you don't mind, were there's some, again, to set that tone, because it's so cool. It's to set the tone for this change, this sort of epic change that's occurring in the movie. And they're just interesting details, the way that the director, that Richard Kelly, decided to do it. So when Donnie comes down from the mountain back home,
that sounds great. Donnie comes down from the mountain. Sounds epic by itself.
Yeah. Donnie came down from the mountain and he was looking for a soul to steal. Maybe there's a Charlie Daniels connection in there.
Yeah. Right.
when he comes home, he gets off his bike and he's walking into the house, and his mom is sitting outside reading Stephen King's It. And have you read It?
I've never read the book. No.
It's so good. So the what happens in It is it's a picture of broadly the plot is a picture of this idyllic Americana image, Norman Rockwell-esque sort of setting, and all the kids in the town know that something's wrong, but the adults are totally oblivious to it. And all of the insidious, sort of nefarious, infernal activity is happening underneath the town. So in the book, you've got this picture of ideal Americana built upon this roiling subconscious where all of this kind of evil stuff is going on. So you've got this very unstable state. All of this sort of white picket fence imagery is built upon this bubbling cauldron of energy that has to get out. So
The
it's very
unconscious
unstable.
of the culture, in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's it. And later, when at nighttime, when we cut from Donnie's room to the parents' room, after Donnie calls his mom a bitch, we see the dad reading Tommyknockers and Stephen King's Tommyknockers. So Tommyknockers, part of that book. I haven't read it. I just looked up a synopsis, but I found this in the explanation. Part of what that is about is you get this something comes out of the sky. I think it's a UFO and lands in this town. Somebody discovers it, and it sort of unlocks a Pandora's box where people get really smart and they start making all these crazy inventions based. It's sort of like the alien mind is attaching to the townspeople, and it's giving them these powers to dream up these inventions and this kind of stuff. But in the blurb it says they're given these incredible powers to dream up inventions, but they are not or don't consider the philosophical or ethical implications of what they've invented. So again, all this stuff pointing back to this instability in specifically, I think, middle class North America or middle class USA. And the other thing was on Donnie's ceiling. There's a shot, I think, when he's getting up after he calls his mom a bitch to follow Frank out to the golf course, right before the jet engine crashes into his room. There's a shot where you see his ceiling, and from Donnie's perspective, when he's laying down, you see the American flag and it's upside down, and that is symbolic of the United States being in a state of distress. So if you're out at sea or something like that, when you fly your flag, if you put it upside down, that means you need help. You're in distress. And also the poster that's right next to it is a Led Zeppelin. I think it's a Led Zeppelin poster, and it's a painting of Icarus, which is a story of somebody who flew too close to the sun, and they fell into the ocean and died.
Should have used Gorilla Glue.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's also called Swan Song. So anyway, we know what a swan song is, and all this stuff is just beautifully indicated subtly, and it's setting up this fantastic state of, oh my God, instability. What's happening next? We're going to have this fork in the road, thunderclap, yada, yada, yada. So
An end of the world language. So I do hope we can also eventually get into the language of eschatology as well, because that, I don't think that sounds cool in the movie, but I think it's also really relevant to talk about. But I wanted to mention also, sort of to piggyback on what you were saying, not only is there this roiling froth of something chaotic under the surface causing the cracks to show in the face of Mrs. Farmer, for example. Just her sort of frantic energy is a manifestation of that. You can see she could snap at any moment. You can tell. Her whole life is about, her daughter's dance performance. It's everything. And this Cunningham guy. But it seems like at several points there are references to things being to points of weakness that can break and then do break. So one water main needs one sort of axe chop and it breaks, and school is canceled. So school is the factory where you make normal people, and if one kid comes in with an axe and just makes one chop to a water main, nobody's going to school today. Or one, well, not one dump of gasoline, but a little gasoline.
that was at least a gallon.
It was a lot. Okay, so 1 gallon of one large gallon of gasoline can destroy a man's life and reputation because it was at the breaking point. One airplane engine needs to land on a town for this whole reality to sort of start to unfold. It's sort of like at every point, it's not just this roiling foam, but you can see that the points of stress and weakness that are about to pop through, and then they do. And over time, it's a kind of release. And so when it returns to the beginning, it's almost like those releases have been brought back into the previous status quo in a way, via deja vu or that experience that they have at the end. In some way, it now is part of it, as though maybe some of the stress has been relieved, or something is different now somehow. So I thought those references, and also when they're in English class and they're talking about that the story, and which is exactly what he did. Those references throughout, I think, are nice, because they establish that feeling of things are gonna blow up very soon throughout, which is sort of anticipatory.
Yeah, it's
Do you want to get into? I wanted to ask about the feminine, and I wonder what you made of that. I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about before we do that? Because I did have a question about that.
There were a couple of shamanism things, but I think we'll probably touch on that stuff later as we get to the end of the movie, as we start talking about that. Specifically, the Walpurgisnacht, or the house party, and how he's dressed. But we'll. Oh God, I forgot. So in the song "The Killing Moon," one of the main lines is "Fate up against your will." So Donnie is, fate is up against his will, and he knows it. So anyway,
yeah, yep,
gems in this movie.
Gems. What did you make of the female characters? A couple interesting things happened. There's his mother, who is this sort of antithesis of Mrs. Farmer. They both have daughters in Sparkle Power, right? Sparkle
Motion.
Sparkle Motion. The dance group, but they look at it from a very different point of view than Mrs. Farmer, the sort of status quo figure, the principal sort of in the same line. Jim Cunningham, similar, but then his English teacher, who is introducing these things that the status quo doesn't really like, and they push back against, and then the girlfriend, Gretchen, right?
Yeah.
What did you make of the different female presences in the movie? What do you think they stand for?
Yeah, the female characters play a very prominent role. I mean, and how to categorize and sort of roll that out. So I don't know. Maybe Roberta Sparrow is supposed to be kind of a foil to Mrs. Farmer, because I mean, they're both older women, but one is way more in the vein of Donnie's mom and the English teacher. And then I don't know, did Miss Farmer really have a companion kooky kind of person in the film?
You mean a male version of her?
Well, it's okay. So it seems like, all right, so Donnie and Gretchen, they I could see them as sort of a pair that mirrors Donnie's mom and Donnie's dad, because Donnie and his dad are sort of compared to each other as being similar. They both sleepwalk. They both read books at night. Um, they both have these some connection to a premonition of death because the dad at one point in the film remembers somebody from high school that had said he felt doomed and he has a car accident and dies. And he says, I could say the same thing about Donnie. So there's that similarity. I don't know. Gretchen just seems like somebody with their head on straight, kind of like Donnie's mom. And then you could compare Donnie's parents to the English teacher and Dr. Monotov because they're together. They're a couple, and they're both level-headed, even-keeled, measured people. And yeah, and then you've got I don't know. That's as far as I
I
think
think
loss of words.
yeah, I think that works. I mean, Mrs. Farmer's, I think, pretty clearly to me the antithesis of
The foil.
the foil for you said Mrs. Sparrow. I suppose I could see that. I saw Mrs. Sparrow, Roberta Sparrow, the old woman, as the prior the shamanka of the story, meaning that because that's how it goes, right? There was a shaman, and they teach you some things, but everybody's path is unique, and she doesn't really give him any guidance. She wrote a book. He's getting some insights and some breadcrumbs from that, but she's not sitting him down saying, all right, now let me teach you about how this time travel stuff works, because she's off on her own journey, and she's only there as a sort of a dirt trail to travel rather than a paved road. So if she represents a foil to Mrs. Farmer, I mean, maybe. I wonder if there's some anima stuff going on with Gretchen. I mean, we'll probably get into why Gretchen is named Gretchen with the Faust stuff, so maybe you want to say something about that. But his English teacher, seems to be an important, to me, anima sort of character, because why does he stay in the classroom after school with the teacher before she leaves when they have the cellar door conversation? It's not quite an Eros thing. It's not a sexual sort of thing where he's in love with his teacher, which is what you would typically get in this sort of high school angst movie, I think. But it's not that. It's sort of like she represents a complement to something that he wants to develop that's in himself that he needs to continue to explore, to sort of realize, in the same way that when he goes up to, I can't remember the girl's name, and she's obsessed with him, and he holds her face and says, it will be better.
Sharita.
She, the English teacher, is maybe that in a way to him, to represent that there's, more something else out there, but does so as a female complement or a feminine complement, so more like an anima character. That I don't know. It's not very fleshed out, and it might be a stretch, but I think that's the kind of relationship they have.
Yeah, I think that's totally legit. I mean, I could imagine, like when I'm watching these movies, I don't know if you do this, but I'm thinking, God, when they were sitting down and writing this movie, and the director was blocking out all the shots, and they're all working this stuff out together, they're thinking about these things, the relationships between characters. And I was talking to somebody about this kind of phenomenon in movies where all this stuff is connected, and they just hadn't thought about it, and they thought, no, they just sit down and write the movie. And it's like, no, they don't. They think about this stuff a lot, and every single word matters, and it's there for a reason. So,
it's easy to forget that. That's a good point to bring up. It's obvious. It should be obvious, but when you go to work and you do your job, you spend 40 hours a week making sure that the stuff that you do at your job is correct, is accurate. So if you're creating something, you don't just throw it together because you're a screenwriter and say, I made it, there you go, make it, do it. Now I'm going to film it. Let's go. Yeah. I mean, you probably spend 8 months to a year just working out all the ideas and diagramming, and it's you're right. It's obvious, but it's worth saying, I think.
Yeah, it's like you could go back to the Ex Machina discussion and look at the wall where I forgot the character's name, the brilliant inventor.
Nathan?
What's his name? Uh, yeah, Nathan. He's the Oscar Isaac's character. He's
Yeah.
got that wall full of post-it
You're,
notes.
that was our last conversation.
Oh man, it's been a crazy couple of months, but
Yeah. Okay. Pass. You get a pass.
thank you. So Nathan's got this wall full of post-it notes, and so directors work the same way, and I can prove it if you watch any of the documentaries of Nicholas Winding Refn's stuff, the guy that Only God Forgives and Bronson and Drive. He does that. He plots all of this. He plots a movie out on a wall with a bunch of post-it notes so he can watch the movie in his head, and so he knows the relationships between things. So yeah, all this stuff is important, and everything you brought up about like the anima, the foils between the characters and the female characters and everything, it's totally legit. And as far as I wonder if yeah, okay. So there's a cool thread to pick up on there. So Mrs. Farmer, if she could be sort of like a competing shaman, okay, to Roberta Sparrow, and I say that because I think Jim Cunningham is sort of a competing shaman to Donnie's character.
Yeah.
And so if I could touch on that for a second,
I agree.
the scene where Donnie goes into so why would we even suspect that he's a competing shaman? So in the scene where Donnie is in the auditorium and Jim Cunningham is up on stage talking, they're kind of having a battle. They're kind of having this shamanic battle of wits in front of everybody else. And so we know that they're in competition with one another. And there's a fairy tale or mythological motif that a sorcerer, sometimes the only way to defeat a sorcerer is to find their secret treasure that they've hidden away. Otherwise, you can't destroy them. So, which fits perfectly for Jim Cunningham. So
Yes.
when Donnie goes into Jim's house to burn it down, he walks into the living room and there's this giant painting, just sort of crass painting of. I don't want to insult the person who actually painted that painting, but it's supposed to signify Cunningham's hubris. And so there's giant painting on the wall between two stag heads, which are like threshold guardians.
Right.
And so Donnie burns it all down, which reveals Cunningham's secret treasure, the thing the Horcrux that he's hidden away, like Voldemort does. That unless you can destroy the Horcrux, you can't destroy the sorcerer. So Cunningham's like a competing shaman.
That makes sense. Yeah, but he's a competing shaman that sort of stands for order or the dying guard, or he needs the world to be as it has been. He needs a bunch of Mrs. Farmers who can throw their adulation at him in order for him to have his power. He gets his power from people like her who worship him, and if someone undermines it, it's like a giraffe who comes into a new territory and then they have a giraffe battle. It's kind of like that, but they're fighting over the zeitgeist in a way, So he knows that his Aristotelian way of seeing things of black and white is dying, and the cracks are showing. Put things into labels. It's either fear or it's happiness, and then someone comes along and points out that the emperor doesn't have clothes on, and actually nothing is that simple, and you'd have to be an idiot to think that that's the way that the world works. Then you're the snake oil salesman who's been upstaged by a better snake oil salesman in a way, or a shaman who's been out shamaned by better shaman.
Bush v. Dukakis.
Bush v. Dukakis. Yeah, there you go. I'm not sure if the analogy works if you actually think about Bush and Dukakis, but yeah.
Well, I was thinking of like the sort of typical view of Republican versus Democrat, like order versus chaos kind of arrangement.
Yeah.
Because and it was, I think, in the guise of military stuff. So you've got sort of the order of strict regimen of military. I mean, maybe it's a stretch, but maybe I'm just way off.
Um, I don't know. I see both of them as representing order. Maybe that's just my bias. I think both,
Totally.
you know.
I think maybe it's just a boring a boring point to bring up. But
Well, maybe that was, but okay. I guess that's not the thing to do. Is to bring your own bias to it. Is that the intention of the film, to highlight Dukakis as a sort of analogy
was it
to Donnie, and Bush as an analogy to Cunningham, maybe.
and maybe was it a re-election year? Because if it was a re-election year, then it works even better because you've got the established sort of versus the upstart. So I don't remember, but maybe that's
I don't remember either.
Illusion.
One thing I know, because I did a tiny little bit of research, is that Dukakis was accused of having mental problems, and they used his neurotic behavior. Bush used his neurotic behavior to paint him as someone who's mentally unstable, and that is attributed as one of the reasons why he didn't win the election, because people saw him as sort of, oh, is this guy, we don't know what he's going to do next, and that's a pretty good parallel, I think.
So it works. Wow, it works.
Yeah, well, it kind of works. I don't know.
Just of the overlapping similarities. Not to push the point too much, but it seems like there's some fun connections there.
Well, it can't be completely coincidental, because it is brought up too often for it to be completely coincidental. Why would you have that on the fridge? Why would you be talking about it so much? Why would it be the thing on the news all the time? Anytime something comes up apparently coincidentally but repeatedly, tends in a movie to not be an accident, because they could have just put something else there. So why constantly bring up
Right.
this battle between Dukakis and liberality? Maybe at that time in the 80s, maybe did represent something that we don't understand, because I was born in 1988, so I don't have a real grasp, a good grasp of the political climate at the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't have.
Did you see the advertisement that I sent you in messages? The Dukakis ad?
I did. Yeah, him just riding around in a tank.
This man is nuts. He doesn't support war. I support war. I'm George Bush. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting messaging back then that was buying more weapons and missiles was the strong selling point.
Man, I kind of like, ooh, ugh.
Well,
Can of worms.
Can of worms, indeed. Maybe I wanted to bring up one other thing about the women characters, and it does jump ahead a little bit, but I'm sure we can jump back to it, because I want to maybe get into the Gretchen thing. But I know you read Faust in prep for this, so I kind of want to hear what you have to say about. Oh yeah, so good, yeah. I kind of want to hear what you have to say about that, but I wonder if there's something about the absence of two characters, two people who you described as the level-headed ones, when the shit goes down, right? So his mother leaves town, and his English teacher is fired. So it's as soon as those two sort of protecting angels, they're somehow holding things not in a sort of not in the same way that the status quo figures are, but sort of keeping things at peace or preventing them from actually breaking. As soon as both of them leave, then everything collapses. And it's an interesting collapse. It's supposed to happen, but it only happens once those two female characters leave the scene, and I wonder if that was intentional.
I don't know, because the dad, he's off on business, and granted, he's not one of the important female characters. He kind of plays a background role in my mind. Yeah, but I guess Mrs. Farmer is also gone. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't catch that. What did you think?
It just reminded me of before a tsunami, the the sea, the shoreline gets sucked backwards, and then there's a tsunami. The water pulls backward. Then you know you have to run because there's about to be a very large wave. That's sort
go ahead.
Space is created for catastrophe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's well when you state it that way. Yeah, that's yeah. Yeah. Have you ever noticed
The eschaton.
like that's good? Yeah. If you watch a movie and there's some kind of mystery to it, but then when you state it when you state what you're seeing in a specific way, it totally clicks and it makes sense. Like what you just said, the tsunami illustration. Yeah, I get it. But then when you say space was created for chaos, then it clicked in. And I don't know if, for people listening, if you watch a movie sometimes and you just verbally state what you're seeing on screen, that can help to click into place what the intent of the writer and the director were trying to get across. It's like if you're just watching it, you see the visuals, you see the symbols, but then you actually have to state it to understand it. Kind of like those games we got, or at least I got in elementary school, where you'd have a string of images that are next to each other, and if you just look at them, they don't really make sense. But then if you say what it is, you see like an eyeball, a heart, and then something else. But then you say, okay, do you know what I'm talking about, Luke?
Yeah,
is there a name for those things?
An eye, and then a picture of a knee, of someone's knee, and then there's maybe just the letter D, and then a female goat. Is that a U? Right. Okay, so that would be I need you.
Something like that.
Something like that. I had that. That's the best I could do off the top of my head. But
that's great.
Yeah, I need you. Then you would read that. Yeah, you get it. But it takes a little while. I believe that you have to really know what you think you know. And I'm reading Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations right now. He would say that exactly. You have no idea what you know until you make words.
Yes.
To say what you know, and only then you still don't know it, but at least you've published something in the world that other people can interact with, and that might change its flavor and then feed back into the system. But you still don't know what you think you know.
Yeah, and that seems to connect with stuff that Jung would say about sort of the islands in our minds. Like there's all these islands in our minds, but until we can attach that landmass back to sort of the original landmass, we're unconscious of it. So it's like, it sounds like there's a connection with what Wittgenstein would say, that until you state it, you don't know that you know it. But then when you're conscious of it, you incorporate it and you kind of move forward with more tools in the toolkit. But I mean, that kind of went off on a rabbit trail, but it seems like for people that like the stuff we're talking about, if they want to go do it on their own more and more, which is, I think, one of the points of our discussions is, like, try that. When you see the visuals or when you see the events going on, restate it your own way, and it can open up so much of movies.
I think it's like crafting something. So you have to make, even if it's very crude. We're not experts really in anything that we're talking about. We just enjoy reading and watching movies. So we're crude craftsmen, but we're trying to make things and sort of let them fly away into the air, and someone else may see that as a germ and get something from that, or we might now understand something a little bit better from each other. It's almost like it's bizarre that we have the bizarre thing is that we have the feeling that we know things when we don't really. The bizarre thing is that there isn't a stable condition of saying, I know what it feels like to want a Coke Zero. What do you mean you know what it feels like? This is going back to Wittgenstein. What do you mean you know what it feels like? When you say, I want a Coke Zero, saying that you want the Coke Zero is wanting the Coke Zero. It's a snapshot of a state or condition which is constantly changing. And when you get the Coke Zero and you drink it, your original thing that made you say that, the condition which has billions of sort of interacting variables, isn't the thing that gets satisfied when you take the sip. It's the future state that has changed, that has now integrated the statement that you formulated in your head to say I want a Coke Zero that you say is satisfied but still isn't. It's crazy. So we're never things seem stable, but they're not stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, rabbit trails off of your question about I couldn't I liked all of the female characters in the movie. Gretchen, the teacher, his mom, Mrs. or Roberta Sparrow, they're, super cool characters, but yeah,
Did you want to get into
I thought
to
the
Faust?
dudes were dopey.
Yeah, dopey dudes. Although the dad, I like the dad. He's cool.
Yeah, yeah. The
he's a
dad
cool
and
guy.
Monotov, the science teacher, he was great as well.
Yeah,
So
Molotov is cool.
Faust, you say?
Faust, I say.
So
Dr.
oh,
Faustus.
man. Yeah. So Faust has been a story that I've seen come up so much in the stuff I've been reading, and I've had a basic sort of understanding of what it is, just a general premise. But then I read it, and it's like, oh man, everything makes sense. Everything. The reason why people reference this book so much totally makes sense. So,
Were you reading the more poetic version or the more prose? Because I know that there are two different ways that it gets translated. Sometimes into prose, and sometimes trying to be true to the original poetic style.
I'm not sure. I got the Oxford Classic edition, so I can't. Even in the intro, the guy explained what method he was using. Yeah, I can't remember, but it didn't.
Well, that's
I don't
very
think
disappointing.
Yeah. Why did you ask? What?
No, I was just curious. It's just a point of curiosity. I don't mean anything by it. I would just wanted to know.
Oh, and I didn't know if maybe you read it and thought the. Well, I remember him saying that in the original German, you've got these word plays going on that just won't translate into English. So I feel like the guy was trying to walk a middle line. So maintain sort of the lyricism in the poetry where he could, but then, when he just couldn't, he just tried to maintain the spirit of the language. So
yeah. The one I have is the one that's supposed to be entirely lyrical and supposed to be very loyal to that. I don't know if it's necessarily better or worse. I have no idea. It's there are times when I feel I could do without it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Faust in general is about this professor who is he's in the middle of I think he's 35, and he's sort of disillusioned with life. He's big brained, he's really smart. He studied all his life. He knows all this stuff, all these facts about the world, but he longs for the sensual side, sort of the Dionysian side of existence. He's strong in the Apollonian side, but he in the smarts and the wit and the knowledge, but he doesn't have sort of the bodily experience, the Dionysian side of it. So he longs for that. He wants to know it. He's tired of knowing facts and all this kind of stuff. He wants to know this bodily experience. So he makes a deal with the devil, or with Mephistopheles, to provide all of these sensual experiences for him in exchange for his soul. If the devil can provide an experience for Dr. Faustus, that Dr. Faustus will say, "I don't want this to end." So meaning that the devil's got to give him something really good, or else the bargain's off. So yeah, so they go through these different experiences together. The pinnacle experience is Dr. Faustus' interaction with Gretchen, which is short for Margareta. And I think she's like 14. So there's, different time periods, but Dr. Faustus falls in love with this 14-year-old girl, and he and Mephistopheles seduce her. It's implied that he sleeps with her. She gets pregnant, and then through a series of events, she gives birth to the child, drowns it, and then is arrested and then executed. there's so much more that goes on. It's so much more rich than that. But that's sort of, I think, that the high points that are important for Donnie Darko. So Donnie is Dr. Faustus in the sense that he's really smart, but he's longing for the sensual experience of life. And we know that, well, we know he's smart just by the stuff that comes out of his mouth. He's always spitting out facts, like the thing about Joseph Lister in 1985 when he's recommending to Gretchen what to write for her paper. And then also, we know that he's longing for the bodily experience because he's telling his therapist, Dr. Thurman, which means Thor's protector, just for fun, that he's always thinking about girls. He's always thinking about sex and fucking. So he's missing this sort of physical side of life. And he's also going through puberty. So it's natural.
Yeah.
And so then Gretchen Ross comes along, and which is, that's Gretchen. And it's implied that essentially he doesn't really seduce her. I don't think that's their relationship, but the pairing matches up with Faustus. And then because of their interaction in the story of Faust, Gretchen is innocent. She embodies innocence. She's pure, but because she comes into contact with Faust, she ends up dying. She gets killed for it. Just like in Donnie Darko, Gretchen is innocent. She is just like an innocent bystander who comes into contact with Donnie Darko, and because of their relationship, she ends up dying through no fault of her own, just like Faust. So, and the bunny is obviously Mephistopheles.
The bunny is Mephistopheles. Okay, yeah, I guess I can see that. Sort of the anti-Virgil.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I was watching the movie, it didn't jump to mind. So, I mean, Faust didn't jump to mind. I know the story, but for whatever reason, even though I knew that you were reading it and I was looking for it, and there's Gretchen, but it didn't click as well for me as the shamanism stuff does. The shamanism, it's very heavy and it's very clear. It's a shamanic story and it's about fate and it's about. So I think it's as you said, it's very Nietzsche and it's very, or you could say Joseph Campbell if you prefer Follow Your Bliss, if that's a better version of Amor Fati. But I don't know, it just didn't click for whatever reason for me. The Gretchen character, it's too maybe it's just they fly by it too fast. She gets hit by the car, she's dead, but then it resets, and then he's dead. So it just it wasn't satisfying as a Faust analogy for me, but I don't doubt that is an intentional reference, because why would they call her Gretchen?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, so I think that sets up, if it is intended to have a connection to Faust, if it is a usage of the Faust narrative, then it ties into Nietzsche's idea of amor fati, and I think like a new spin on it, which I think that's what Richard Kelly is trying to bring to the table, so that if Faust could essentially go back and change what he did, would he change it? And that brings us into the whole Nietzsche eternal recurrence amor fati discussion. But
for those not familiar with the concept of eternal recurrence and Nietzsche's love of fate, do you want to just explain that a little bit, how he thought of it, and then maybe we can tie it back to the movie?
Yeah, and it might illuminate why it has some bearing on the Faust myth as well. So there's an anecdote where Nietzsche has the idea of love of fate, amor fati, after he's walking along the edge of this lake. I think it's Lake Silvaplana. I forget where it is, but he's walking along this lake and he comes to this stone, this big rock along the path, and he has this epiphany of this idea of he embodies it in a narrative of, okay, if one day a demon showed up to you and said to you, You have to live your life over and over and over again eternally the way it has been up until this point, disregarding neither the good nor the bad. You have to repeat all of it ad infinitum forever. Would you curse the demon and say, get out of here? Or would you praise that being as an angel, like a harbinger? Oh my God, I can't wait to live this over and over again. And that, brings in all these philosophical implications about, hey, what are you doing with your life? That kind of thing. How can you say anything is good or bad? There's tons that goes with it. But essentially, the human being is given a choice to evaluate what they've been doing with their time. And so Nietzsche's idea was that if you want to be a real overhuman, an Ubermensch, that you'll be able to affirm, you would praise that being as an angel because you would affirm everything that you've been doing or that has happened to you or that you have done as a positive, as you would say yes to it and not no. And
a yay sayer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a yay sayer. Yeah. And so that sets up the love of fate. And so in the movie, the demon that shows up to Donnie is the rabbit, which is also Mephistopheles, which is also a tutelary spirit in shamanism. And and so then later in the movie, Donnie gets that opportunity to essentially go back in time and act upon that. Instead of in like Nietzsche's world where you don't have a choice or whether or not you're going to do stuff over and over again, Donnie's given a choice. And I think that's where the break with eternal recurrence is. That's sort of Richard Kelly's contribution, his breakout of the mold to put a different spin on it.
I agree with you, but I see it slightly differently. So Nietzsche's take on it is really just it's a thought experiment. He probably did see the universe as deterministic at the time. So that probably played into it, but in Zarathustra, it's more of a way of expressing a rejoicing of the present in his own spin on that, being a yay sayer, and not evaluating and labeling each thing that arises and goes away. There are similarities to Nietzsche and Buddhism, but there are also a lot of differences. I think there's more of a Hindu aspect to the Donnie Darko version when he talks about the bubble that comes out of his chest being God's channel, right? It's not, I don't think, about the scientific determinism, which you could say, well, the universe is deterministic. On a scientific level, particles bounce where they bounce, and there isn't really any free will. Yeah, you could say that, but I don't think that's not really interesting. It's more the Hinduism type of when you're born into a certain caste, mm-hmm. That's what you are. And you're not supposed to grind against it and push against it. That's what you are, that when you're born. But also there are stages in life. There are 4 stages in life. There's a stage where you're learning, a stage where you're producing, a stage where you start to separate yourself and finally become sort of an ascetic, and you completely isolate from society. That also is this thing that that you're going to do from birth. We don't really see it that way because our roles are not as clearly defined, but there's a sense of sort of cultural, religious amor fati of I should be here. And if I'm initially not happy, this is my dharma. If I'm initially not happy with where I am, it's probably because of the things that I've accumulated. It's probably because of my karma from my past lives. So I should be here because I need to go somewhere else in the future. Maybe I can change in the next life, or maybe not. So it seems more a nod, also a nod to Hinduism for this version, but also that in Hinduism, the beginning, or the end, represents the beginning as well. So when you reach the end of one of the years of the Brahman, then it starts over it starts over again, and it starts over again, and it repeats endlessly, right? For the different ages. So that seems more like a nod to Hinduism. So it's sort of like a hybrid of Nietzsche and Hinduism at the same time.
Yeah, when I was looking at, in the end, Donnie's laying in his bed. He goes back to the fork in the road when the jet engine is going to crash through his ceiling. And the way I interpreted that was that he, the whole movie, he's been searching for knowledge, and he's been trying to, be obedient to Frank so that he can get this knowledge that he wants. And that path ends up killing Gretchen. And in the end, he regrets killing Gretchen. He's sorrowful. He's sad. And I feel like he comes to the conclusion that even though I've done this good stuff along the way of seeking this knowledge, like I flooded the school, I revealed I burned down that pervert's house, that also had negative consequences. And the ultimate negative consequence for him was the death of Gretchen. And so he sees a more joyful, satisfying solution to go back into time and accept his death of the jet engine crashing into his bedroom and killing him, which will also not set off all these other negative things happening along with the positive things that would happen. But ultimately, I think the fact that his drive ended up killing Gretchen is what led him to be happy to go back into time and accept death instead. Because it seems like that's his way of saying yes instead of no, I'm not going to fight anymore. I think that might be the point at which it contacts what you're saying as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think Zarathustra also does that standing on top of a mountain, right? Separate from everybody else. So he goes through his not shamanic journey, but he becomes who he is, and then realizes he cannot even communicate with the rabble anymore. He has to separate himself and go to the top of the mountain. So I think there's that too. And his yay saying ties back to what he says in the film when he's speaking to the therapist about what the old woman told him or whispered to him, which is that everyone dies alone. He does die alone, laughing hysterically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he's content, and he breathes that sigh of relief when we see him. He's laughing, and then he lays down. He turns over and he goes, and then the jet engine crashes through his room. So he seems at peace and content.
Yeah, yeah. Although when it crashes through his room, it doesn't really hit his bed. It kind of goes in the middle. It's hard to tell. It wasn't very satisfying. I wanted it to be like a clean slice or something.
Yeah, I want to see a big explosion of guts and.
Yes, that would have been good. But if that's symbolic for just the coming of age, then that's an ego death. Or maybe there's that aspect of angst when you realize that you're the weird kid in school because you're smarter than everyone else, and you're from a small town, and nobody thinks like you do, and you thought that you were supposed to try to be like them and fit in and adjust yourself to this status quo, but then you realize through this difficulty that there's a wider world, and you are about to actually blossom. You haven't even started yet. This represents one ego death is a brand new beginning, is the start of something completely new. So the whole movie could just be that.
Yeah, an ego death. Yeah, ego death. I mean, they actually do say the ego, like ego mirror thing, and one of Jim Cunningham's acolytes says something about looking in the mirror and seeing my ego fear something.
You're looking back and seeing fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think it's partially an ego death, but speaking of the Cunningham thing, just his way of looking at the world, which he sort of bristles against, the sort of categories and labels. Did you have anything on that? Because that's a pretty common idea throughout the movie as well. It's are things in boxes, or is this a kind of gray area? And the scene in front of the chalkboard when he confronts Mrs. Farmer, then later confronts Jim Cunningham, right? Jim Cunningham?
Yeah, Cunningham and Farmer, yeah.
Cunningham and Farmer. He confronts both of them about the same thing. They're representing a binary view of the world, or they're presenting a binary view of the world. It's either this or it's this. It's fear or it's happiness. He's pushing against this, and I mean, I think that's something that represent two important parts of the film for me. I wonder if you wanted to bring up anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was there. I mean, definitely noticed it. It seems like, again, we could bring up ideas of, when you have order, when you can easily put stuff into boxes, it's easy to navigate. You can do things more quickly. But then when you have this chaos of gray, well, then you move more slowly. You have to deliberate and decipher things. And I think that is not conducive to the accumulation of wealth, number one. But because you have to take time, you can't act as quickly because you're thinking, you're using clock cycles to parse out. Well, I can't just say this is good or evil. I have to have a more granular view, which means juggling more plates. Rather than just holding two things in my hands, now I got to juggle plates all the time. That takes more concentration and effort. So, yeah, that's what. If Monotov and his girlfriend, I don't know if they're married or not, but the English teacher, forgot her name, they represent slowing down, taking time, deliberating, trying to communicate, whereas Mrs. Farmer and Cunningham were just, hey, this is good, this is bad, let's move on, let's do this.
Her name is Ms. Pomeroy, I think.
Pomeroy,
I think that's her name. Yeah, I wrote it down unless I wrote down the wrong name. But I have the probably negative characteristic of biasing what I talk about in terms of what I've been reading. I've been talking about the philosophical investigations stuff, but could be worse. It could be worse. This brought up something, the labels thing. There's a way of looking at the world which is Aristotelian, and that is put it in a box. Label it. It's good, it's bad. It's evil, it's schizophrenia. You're a disease, that's what you have. It's happiness, it's fear. Let's put it in a box. That's a way, as you said, of representing the world. I finished it, listening to a series of lectures by James Hillman on the psychology of alchemy. And it's really insightful the way that he talks about it, because it sort of provides, it's not like alchemy is psychology, it's that the language of alchemy provides a linguistic framework for psychology to rest on that better captures the phenomenon itself. So if you look at things from the Freudian sense, okay, you have pretty clear labels for things That's the shadow, or that's the Freudian Jungian, let's say. Early Jungian, let's say. Okay, so that's the shadow, that's the id, and these are these little things, these categories. But those are not what those things are. Freud and Jung were trying to build a linguistic framework for explaining something, a phenomenon that they saw as common, and you couldn't blame them for that. But the reason that Jung got so fascinated by alchemy later was not that it's not just curiosity. He realized that alchemy was actually a better linguistic framework on which to sit the phenomenon of the human unconscious. That instead of it being a trauma or something like that, then you could use the alchemical yellowing as a phase which is tinted this way or that way and is part of a process moving in the direction of the rubedo, moving in that direction away from the albedo, right? So moving in a certain direction and with tints of things, and these processes of thinking of things as on a burner in certain places, and there being different burners for different things. So it's kind of ridiculous on the face of it, but then it does actually capture it better because it represents gradients. It's all about gradients and movements toward and away from things rather than being these boxes. So bringing it back to the movie, that's what I made that, in my mind, I made that connection, sort of like everyone's talking about, especially Cunningham and Mrs. Farmer, they're talking about things, they're trying to label everything. And he's realizing that doesn't explain the world because he's learned all the labels and he's not satisfied by it. So when something comes along, a language of I don't know what the language would be called, but this new language of time travel and the book that he's been given, this map, which is kind of obscure, it gives him a better framework for fitting in what's going on so that it makes sense and it sort of can encompass the phenomenon instead of feeling like there's something lacking. The labels, the boxes are breaking at the seams because they can't capture the phenomenon. So that's something that maybe I'm just imprinting what I've been listening to onto that. That's very possible. But I do find it very interesting that actually there isn't only one framework and the thing is not the label.
Yeah. I mean, at the base, I mean, everything you just said is fun stuff, and hopefully it'll start some people down a path of looking at alchemy for sure. Yeah. I didn't, this is one of the movies where I didn't catch a lot of overt references to alchemy. I would imagine that.
I don't think it was overt. I wasn't trying to say it was overt. I don't think it was.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I still kind of wouldn't doubt that the people who wrote it and along with the director, they totally had those discussions. It just with all this same kind of content, it comes up. But yeah. Wittgenstein, yeah, I wish I'd read Philosophical Investigations by now or finished Zarathustra, but yeah, putting stuff into boxes, the gradients for sure.
It's also very Nietzsche, beyond good and evil means labels are ridiculous.
Yeah. I've still got to start that Nietzsche
explode the labels.
Yeah, did you have something else you wanted to move on to? Because there are a couple of things I wanted to.
Please.
We should talk about. Well, what about talking about going back to shamanism a little bit? Because we were talking about the end of the film, and which the part we're talking about now sort of encompasses I think Walpurgisnacht, or the Halloween party, and there's a lot of symbolism built into that setting. So
it seems like so many movies happen on Halloween. It seems like a very common setting
because it's awesome.
Yeah. I don't think it's awesome. It's my birthday and it's not that awesome.
Oh, that's too bad. So, yeah. You mind if I jump back into that a little bit?
Please. Okay.
So Walpurgisnacht Halloween, Sam Hain, all that kind of stuff. We get back to that. We get to this sort of culmination of the film. It all
Sam
culminates
Hain.
on. Yeah, yeah. I think it's Sam Hain. I think that's what the like Celtic or Northern European,
What does it
Western
mean?
European. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure that's one of the names for that season where
Okay.
the lines between the living and the dead, like that state is they're not as distinct anymore. Like the dead come back, ancestor worship, all
Mm,
this kind of stuff.
right.
So that's the part we're looking at the near the end of the film when they have the house party at Donnie and his sister Elizabeth's house. And so that's like Walpurgisnacht when Faust is going up on the mountaintop and he's seeing all these different characters, political figures, I think like a priest and all these different characters. So I think to tie the movie back into Faust a little bit more, what do we have in the house? We've got all these crazy like political figures, social figures. One guy even says something, Roosevelt. And so it's like, why is he saying Roosevelt? I don't know, but I think maybe it's a nod to setting the tone for, okay, this is like the Walpurgisnacht. Uh, so Donnie, when he gets dressed up for Halloween, he dresses up in a skeleton costume, which has tons of significance, potential significance. I think one of the things is to show that he's almost dead. He's almost like a walking dead man.
Yep.
Also, in shamanic initiations, one of the phenomena that happens is that the initiate will die and have all of his organs, his muscles, and all of his tissues stripped away down to his bones, and then everything will be rebuilt from his bones so that he comes back from the dead, a new person with a new vision, a new vocabulary, new powers, new gifts to bring back to
I hate
everybody.
when that happens.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. So, uh, God, was that it?
So
I don't know.
okay, wait. Can you connect that back to? Sorry, I might have missed the Faust connection there with the Halloween. So is it the skeleton? He's wearing a shirt under his hoodie, and he's always putting his hoodie up for some reason. The hood up on his hoodie for some reason.
That's I think when he changes character. That's kind of so he puts the hood up when he goes into his ecstatic state because when he's in the movie theater
Right.
with Gretchen, he puts the hood up after he sees the portal to Cunningham's house, and it's almost like that's a cave motif, like an initiation cave motif when they go into the theater to view this art on a wall, and then
Hmm.
he goes in one person, he comes back out another. So that was one thing, but with the uh, Walpurgisnacht, that's at the end of Faust when they go up the mountain. He goes up the mountain with Mephistopheles, and there's all the witches doing their thing, and then like in another part, there's all these different political social figures sitting around doing stuff, talking about stuff as well. It's very silly, very chaotic, and just irreverent, which is just like Halloween night. People dress up like the one guy's dressed up as Hulk Hogan. One guy mentions Roosevelt. There's a Viking, and just all these people playing a part, and the world is turned on its head, essentially.
I think Hulk Hogan is in Faust Part Two. There are a lot of zany characters in
Right.
that one. I think he's in Faust Part Two if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think he's drinking wine with Helen or something.
Yeah.
Helen of Troy.
Does is there any relevance to the fact that he gets laid for the first time, presumably the first time?
Hmm.
Is that relevant on that night? The day
Well,
before, the night of his death, essentially. Well, hers and his.
their sexual relation is sort of what seals their fate, or her specifically Gretchen's fate. I don't know if that completely overlays 100% with Donnie Darko. I think it's just like an important similarity, like an important story beat in both stories.
Right. Is there anything else on shamanism you wanted to touch on? Because I wanted to bring up. I
Oh
mean, I
yeah,
have one other thing, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So there were two. So in shamanism, in some cultures, the bird plays a very important role, and specifically the thunderbird in some cultures, and
To a
a,
sparrow.
a yeah, I didn't even notice sparrow, but yeah, there's an iron winged bird. Okay, so did we have a thunderbird or an iron winged bird in this movie? Yeah. So the plane, that's an iron winged bird.
Hmm.
And then also the Frank drives a thunderbird. So it's like he's just giving it to us, pretty obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
No,
I mean, it kind of
no
it
great tree, no drum though. Unfortunately, not really.
yeah, we didn't have a world tree really in this one, other than maybe the jet engine being the meteorite
Yeah,
and everything
maybe.
kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of loose.
I mean, the meteorite thing itself is a stretch. So that's like a stretch on a stretch. Uh,
I I think it's interesting.
it's yeah. I mean, it's interesting. That for me, that's kind of the important thing is because if I watch this in 5 years and we talk about it, we'll get different things. I mean, yeah, unless it's so obviously unrelated that it's can be said is wrong, which I think is possible. I think there are dumb comments and dumb questions. Then I think I mean it's interesting to sort of watch it and just let it kind of sink in because as I was watching it both times just with my iPad and I was just writing things down that came to mind as I was watching. And the first time I wasn't really doing that. The second time I was doing it a little bit more seriously because I just wanted to remember some of the beats, you know.
Yeah.
What about? Well, there's a lot of mythology around eschatology or the end times, and this sort of end times being a kind of object in a sense. Terence McKenna calls it the eschaton, which I think is an interesting noun version of it. I don't know if that's actually a word. That sort of the end of the world being what? The end of the world being an end of adolescence, beginning of adulthood, the end of the world being replacement from one passing one generation onto another. That's obviously happening. Older world to newer world, but that probably happens with every generation. So that's there. But then there's a way to think about our eschatology and why is it that we project significance and endings onto everything, that we insist that there has to be an end, or we have the inclination for things to end, or when something new happens we think it means that the end is coming. All of those things I think are kind of overlapping. It's not like there's one clear thing, but eschatology being the reason and myth and ideas surrounding the end of things, and this being sort of a story about all kinds of endings as brought about by chaos, and maybe natural chaos, or maybe chaos in another form. But for the literal type, chaos of this guy who's been initiated, running around smashing things and causing chaos,
Right.
that ends up revealing, as we've talked about, the dark underside of the society, of the culture, of the older generation, right?
Yeah, an apocalypse, which means like a revealing. Yeah, so there are a couple of. We can see that if we take Donnie's actions as he is ending a world. He first does it. Well, the first time he's done it 3 times. Apparently, he burned down a house when he was younger. That's why he can't drive till he's 21. That's why he's seeing a therapist. So there's that, and then he ends up flooding the school, which is reflecting the book that he's read. So life is imitating art, but that's an end of the world, just like that's the deluge motif, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the destruction of the world, and then he destroys another world by fire, which is in the book of Revelation. That's how
Mm-hmm.
God is going to destroy the world at the end before there's, the new heaven, like heaven. And so, yeah, those definitely as end of the world motifs stuck out. And then for Donnie, it's the end of the world. It's the end of his experiencing the phenomenon of the world at the end of the film when he accepts sort of his fate to be crushed underneath the jet engine. So
Yeah, it's the eschaton for him, very literally.
it's more like an eschaton of jet engine that hits him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But
I'll show myself out.
which door are you going to go through? The one that leads to the closet?
Yeah. I'm just gonna. I'll pick. I got choices.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was an interesting thing to center the movie around, because it's like in Dark, how everything in that show, Dark, centers around this event that is forwards and backwards in time. Spoiler alert. About it's not really a spoiler, right? Because it is that they set that up from the beginning, I think.
Yeah.
Similar in that sense. Everything wraps around this point, and it's almost as though having this point or this countdown is a way to it provides a kind of timeline or structure or lattice on which you can then build up ideas. And if you don't have that timeline or that idea that this means that this is going to happen in this amount of time, then you can't build up this structure around it, which is the mythology, which is the eschatology, which is trying to understand what it all means and put together the pieces and the battle between the order and the chaos. And then when the chaos beats the order, the fact that it repeats the cycle and that then the new chaos becomes the new order, and it requires a new, it's like a forest fire, right? You have to have forest fires so that they can, if they're stopped, then it causes terrible forest fires, and regular forest fires regulate the ecosystem in the same way that generations replace generations to regulate the culture. So you have a bunch of baby boomers who used to be the ones upsetting everything, then being replaced by maybe millennials or the next generation, but that's going to just keep happening forever. And it's just a way of rejuvenating, but in a sense, that is the end of the world for that set of memes, right?
Yeah, we're all just memes. Yeah,
it is.
Sure.
I mean, but you have to have an idea about what the end means or what the end looks like. For generations, it's not so clear. But if you have a kind of the more narrow, I guess what I want to say is the more narrow the point is, the more easily you can build out your story and unify your group so that the myth includes or excludes you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and the idea of inclusion and exclusion being that Aristotelian logic, which gives you, I think, a rapid way to build structure versus the non-Aristotelian, so Aristotelian is the logic that says A cannot equal not A. So an apple cannot equal a pear. But then if you look at Eastern philosophy, it's like, yeah, they're both the same thing. Like myself and a rock were the same thing. Yeah. So you get that more of the gray. But that's not
Zhuangzi. I am a butterfly.
Say what?
Zhuangzi. I'm a butterfly. Butterfly dream guy.
Or I am a cat bus. So
yeah.
So building a structure that is very efficient is better built upon Aristotelian logic, because you get very clear inclusion, exclusion. Whereas if you want, but that gets brittle and it breaks down once it reaches a certain point. I think like once that system demands more energy than is available to maintain it, then it breaks down. Then you go back into chaos, which is where you get the gray, which is where you get revolution, which is where you get creative thought, art, all that kind of stuff that provokes people to think in different ways. So, and they both create each other, right? So
yeah, but now it's too complicated to happen as overtly as Andy Warhol painting a soup can. Now it has to happen in crypto land, and it's
Say
it's
what?
it's NFTs versus I don't know. There's something. It's almost like we had to
NFTs
move
versus the world.
we had to move to a different landscape in order to fight the war, because there's too much information for it to be contained in the world, the physical world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, gold as a store of value, then that's supplanted by fiat currency, which is then supplanted by I don't know what, oil, and then it's supplanted by crypto. It's like there's a circle, and at the beginning the circle is like this, but then as it expands, there's points along the circle, but as that circle expands, there's gaps between the points, and then something has an opportunity to fill the gap. And as it gets bigger and bigger, you just get these gaps that have to be filled by a new thing. So when I'm trying to visualize how the phenomenon is happening, that's what comes to mind. And I don't know if you've got a different way to view it, or what do you think?
Well, it is it all tracks in a very evolutionary way. The way that species evolve, the way that cultures evolve, the way that languages evolve, the way that money systems evolve, the way that culture between generations evolves, even within one generation, it all follows a very similar pattern. And so in that sense, I can see a kind of shape you can kind of see where it's going, because it's the same story happening in different domains. And it just happens to be that in this part of a story that we happen to be in, it was like we crossed a threshold where the information density required to create the next iteration to fill the gap couldn't sit on the substrate of TV, banks, a job, a career that you have for a life, the thing that people who are now maybe in their 50s, and that stuff that world can't contain what had to happen, because now it's too connected. So it had to sort of move online, and so now it's all going to be there. But then in the future, maybe that will be supplanted. Who knows? Which
is basically, to tie that back into Donnie Darko, the phenomenon that we just talked about, which is occurring now, is take that situation and put it on 1988, and you can get an idea of maybe the emotions that everybody in Donnie Darko was feeling. It's like, this is a new world. All this stuff is happening. There's the old structure we want, that's comfortable for the people that have sort of made a benefit off of it. But then the new people coming up, they need something new because the world has changed, and so they have to rewrite their myths. And so that's where Donnie finds dissatisfaction. He's dissatisfied with the myth that he's been given from the generation before him, and he's trying to and so is Miss Pomeroy. She feels the same way. She's saying, I can't, it's hard to reach these kids now, we're losing them. You need something more subtle and creative to empower them to build something based off the reality that they are inheriting from the generation before.
But for that previous generation, that was perfectly acceptable. That was a perfectly suitable way of doing things. The model has broken down, but because the previous generation holds the reins and controls the levers, then they think that that's how it is, because they are not looking at the whole tapestry and aren't seeing maybe. But then when the next generation is in that same position, it probably won't be different. It's sort of like the eternal recurrence of Gen Z or something like that.
There you
go. I wonder, just connected to that, if there's something communicated about generationally about control, or I don't know if control is the right word, but maybe if I just say the two things. So if Cunningham, the pedophile, and Mrs. Farmer, the turbo mom lady, if they sort of represent, I think that they stand on a similar sort of stage. When he's accused, she assumes that it's a false accusation and that he's been smeared because he represents to her the king of their generation. He's the pinnacle, he's the height. And to think that he might be, that his throne could crumble and be replaced, that disrupts her world. But I wonder if there's also then a connection between the way that they behave toward children, that he is like leeching, I don't know how to say, he's like leeching off of their youth.
He's like a vampire.
He's like a vampire, but then also she's doing the same thing with Sparkle Motion, where she needs them to fit her way of seeing the world and say, okay, if you dance perfectly, this is my dream for you, and if you fulfill that.
Yeah, and put Cunningham and Farmer up against Molotov and
Mazel
Pomeroy.
tov, right?
Yeah. Put those two up against Monotov and Pomeroy. Look at how those two interact with the kids. They interact with them as equals and peers. They're not so much looking to control them. They're more sort of like sharpening them, like iron sharpens iron. They're trying to instigate and incept creative thinking and agency, whereas Farmer and Cunningham are strictly control and projecting their maybe unspent desires and unspent youths onto them without encouraging them to think for themselves so much.
Right. You called it vampiric. I think vampiric is a good word to use. It's like there's an anime somewhere where someone puts kids in a vessel or something and it actually zaps the energy out of them. Well, I guess Sleeping Beauty would be an example of that, right? So that's sort of, I need to pull the youth out of you in order to have it for myself, in a way.
The story of Carmilla.
Yeah.
The female vampire who eats feast on like young women. So, I mean, that's like another motif of that. I mean, The Matrix in some way, it's not specifically kids, but off of humans, but leeching energy and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, those are my main questions and main things. Is there anything that we didn't get to talk about? I mean, I have a couple other small notes, but is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to bring up?
Oh, Roberta Sparrow is a shamaness. She has a bunch of gems. She's got a gem collection, which shamans have this connection in some places with putting gems in their bodies to give them a diamond body or a more resilient body. So small cleanup, house cleaning detail. But
I think that and the sparrow thing are both just subtle nods to her being a ostensibly old lady version of Donnie. She's done the same thing. She did the same thing already. She's been through it, and maybe she didn't die. But he's doing that too. He's following her path within his time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's also something go ahead.
Well, I was trying to figure out maybe or more clearly define the relationship between Donnie and Frank. Like, is the only thing that came to mind was being like a tutelary spirit, and also Mephistopheles in the sense making a bargain with a darker spirit. So that's not of this world. Roberta Sparrow, Mrs. Pomeroy, and the mom, and Dr. Thurman, they're all sort of teachers of this world. So I think them being the ancestors that are trying to bring them up well is where that fits. They're like the other people in the tribe, the other shamans, whereas the bunny, Frank, he's other. He's something different. He's a tutelary spirit. So Yeah, did it work the same for you, or what did you
I
think?
think so. I mean, I don't see his mother or Dr. Thurman as shamenkas. I see them as just members of the tribe who it's
Sure.
almost like by their proximity to the shaman, they are pulled into his fate orbit, and
Mm,
by virtue of their being in proximity and sort of feeling that energy, for lack of a better way, they kind of help clear the orbit of debris so that he can
yeah.
carry out his fate more easily, in a way, in the same way that the village will facilitate the shamanic rituals by the shaman is laying on the bed and he's totally out of it, and they're kind of mopping his brow, and that's sort of what where they maybe they're ladling some soup into his mouth every now and then, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there was a, a cool detail earlier in the film when Donnie's mom goes into his room to sort of confront him. She's like, "Where do you go at night?" And they have this argument, and she says, um, "Who is this person? Who is this person? Or where is my son? Who I don't even understand. I don't even know who the person is I'm looking at today." So, like in the shamanic experience, the initiate goes away one person and comes back totally unrecognizable
Right.
after they're fully initiated. Like they sometimes they get a new name, they have to relearn how to speak the language of the tribe, they have to relearn how to eat, how to walk, and all this, all this stuff. So again, in the film, it seems like another nod to the shaman's experience.
Yep. Yep. I think what we're realizing is that the movie is kind of about shamanism, or something.
Yeah.
It's slowly dawning on us.
Mm.
There is
We should
one
do a
other.
podcast about it.
We should. Let's do it. This is our warm up. I wanted to. I wanted to talk about just quickly
Hmm.
why do the cellar door thing. That is the premise of the cellar door is that it's aesthetic, and I could be way off, but the aesthetic is the somehow fundamental to the portal that allows
Yeah.
the time loop to complete. Um, so why would the aesthetic have some sort of connection to this? Why would as he's going through the portal at the end, why would he be saying cellar door? Maybe my interpretation is totally off, but I got the feeling that there's something about aesthetics which make truth based on aesthetics sufficient as truth. In other words, if
Yeah.
you're trying to discover your fate, and I think Campbell, this is what he's saying when he says follow your bliss, right? And it made me look up small Campbell quote. He says your sacred space is where you can find yourself over and over again. We must be willing to let go of the life we planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. But I think that following your bliss, which is Campbell's version of amor fati, is finding the thing that feels right to you. So you sort of lock into a channel and you feel like this is correct, not for a logical reason, but purely for aesthetics. It seems right to my sensibilities. It's a beautiful choice. And we tend not to sort of focus on making beautiful choices or following things because they feel beautiful, but actually that might be a perfectly valid way to live. And maybe I was thinking maybe the cellar door is a nod toward everything that he's doing. Burning down the house is following his bliss and doing what feels most authentic, as opposed to rejecting it and denying it, causing repression, which then leads to pain, much more pain down the road. So he's doing ridiculous things, living authentically, as opposed to what normal people would do, which would be to say, no, I don't have this feeling. Then you run into the situation where you don't know yourself anymore, so you're not in touch with that with what your bliss even is, and you're in a sort of hell state where you think you're happy and you can't find the source.
Yeah, I mean that seems to tie in really well with what Nietzsche was all about. Sort of the idea of the last man or the last men, the ones that accept rules, the status quo, easy existence, comfortable existence, which perfectly personifies the town of Middlesex and specifically Sparkle Motion. I mean, you can see as much, even as vapid as Mrs. Pomeroy thinks Sparkle Motion is, but when she sees it, like the girls practicing, you can tell how she feels about it by the expression on her face. When she's confronted with the experience of watching them dance with the music and the lights and the dancing and whatnot, she gets into it. Like she's looking around and wants to see if anybody else sees it. She's kind of dancing along with it,
sucked in by the iPods and the trinkets and the gadgets. Why did I say iPods? I got sucked in by iPod. Someone gave me an iPod Nano, and I just gave up on my destiny.
Yeah, our time is up, dude. We're done. So, yeah, and whereas Donnie, he's the one that's accepting he's following his bliss, even though a lot of it is dictated by his unconscious, and he does destructive things, which, that's a bigger discussion.
He never regrets it, though. He never has cause to regret it. He's following it. It's his unconscious, and it's leading him in the right direction, even though it looks chaotic.
Yeah, for the time being. And then at the end, he sort of chooses the other fork in the road. He forgoes all of those experiences, I think, to save Gretchen's life, because that's what he really cares about. But he's not one of the last men. He's not lulled into comfort and uncritical thinking. He's not that. He's an ubermensch. He's an overman, whatever. And he's also not like a Philistine, an immediate man, like Kierkegaard would say. So, God, what did you ask me? Or what was the...
Well, I guess we were just talking about, I was talking about, Campbell's idea of following your bliss, but based on aesthetics, and maybe cellar door being a reference to that as a sort of a valid way of seeing the world, as opposed to irrational, which is how we would normally teach it.
Yeah, so that made me think about the movie Arrival, but I'll come back to that. So aesthetics as dictating destiny. It's a great place to bring up how art influences life in the movie. So Donnie floods the cellar based on the book that he wrote. He burns down the house based on, I guess, the book as well. That has a connection with the book, the Graham Greens, The Destructors, that they're reading. And then cellar door, that comes from another book, or just a linguist, which inspires him to go to Roberta Sparrow's house. So we see art, aesthetics, inspiring these cataclysmic activities that Donnie instigates. So just like in Arrival, they go, we talked about that one, they go into this womb-like theater to look at the stuff projected on a screen, which is like a movie, right? And that's where they learn a new language. That's where they bring about and instigate the new world, just like Donnie is doing. He goes into he's like in the womb of his room reading this book to learn a new language. He goes into the theater, and then Frank obviously connects aesthetics, the movie that he's watching, with this new world that he's going to bring about by burning down the house. So yeah, this connection between art and new life, I think, was, to me, pretty intentional and apparent in the film.
Did you ever read that movie? Read that book, Gödel Escher Bach? Did you ever?
No, but I have a friend who keeps recommending it to me, so it's on my radar for sure, but I don't know it.
So, well, Douglas Hofstadter has this idea that actually the analogy is not the derivation of the, let's say, primary thing, to explain it, but the analogy is primary, and the thing that we think is the primary thing is just an explanation of the analogy, meaning that we're analogy creatures. We're not built for, let's say, understanding the universe mathematically. We use analogies, then we build the mathematics to explain it. So it reminded me of when you, if I can disclose, you have an experience right now where you're part of something that's sort of in a chrysalis that will probably impact culture in a pretty profound way in the next 10 years, and you're very much on the ground level of that. And you describe that as weaving the myth that then people will later learn and recite, something along those lines, where the myth is being, you're part of the creation of the myth. And I'm realizing that more and more that's true. It's not, it's that you hear the thing in the story and it doesn't guide you, but it becomes part of the algorithms that lead you to make decisions, and maybe more so than reason, which is the thing that we celebrate as the great discovery of the human mind. Reason is not reason, it's the gut, and it's the hooks that it happens to have for myth and for analogy and stories and a cellar door and something being beautiful, and that when we speak words, we create the reality. The thing that you're doing, and why did all crypto crash this week? Well, part of it is for other reasons, but also then people started telling the story that crypto is crashing this week, and the story becomes part of the crash and affects it into the future. It's weird, but it's almost like the analogies are the primary the pieces of reality, and then everything else sort of is secondary, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like if you only get, like, the reason, the mechanics of it all is useful, but then if you get hung up on that, you miss the sort of lived experience of it. And I think human beings yearn more for the lived experience. Like Zarathustra is a poetic, more narrativized option or version of a complex system of philosophy. And when you read Zarathustra, it's you connect on a different level with what Nietzsche is saying, because the way his complex philosophy is delivered in that book gives you more opportunity to play. Whereas if you're reading maybe some of his other books, it's more instructive. It's way more detail oriented, which is great, which is amazing, which is useful. It just seems that the other books are more concrete and rigid, and that's fine. But then
Zarathustra is a flourish.
Just like Donnie Darko is a flourish off of all of these other systematic forms of, or at the base, like systematic forms of viewing the world, but they sort of express them, they find expression in a movie, in a narrative, in something that has, a story arc. So. It's changed the way I think about things a lot. 10 years ago, I would have said that stories are dumb. Period. Doesn't matter. Science, baby. Is what I would have said, I think. And I would have. If you can do both,
right? No, I'm not.
If you can do,
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, if you can do, so it's. Do you think about it, or have you thought about it in the sense that those things, we're given sort of two options along a binary? We're given narrative, and then we're given science. We're given religion. We're given physics or whatever, but different people respond to either ends of that spectrum. Some people do not give a shit about the mechanics. They just want the narrative and the feeling. And then some people are the reverse. But if you can do both, then you can dance in, both of those ballrooms, essentially.
Well, that's what is going on in Donnie Darko too, because he's engaging with a magical rabbit who other people can't see, but he's going to his science teacher and asking how time travel works to understand it a little better so that he
Hmm.
can blend together this picture that is a better language for understanding the world than just the binary, than just the sort of this. It goes back to the point I was making earlier about psychology being boxes, the language of psychology being boxes and tags, and something else slightly larger that blends the two, as you're describing, a kind of dance between science and mythology being this thing that can sustain or encompass, so that you feel nourished by it rather than checking out, which is what he's about to do because he's learned everything. He's Faust and he's checking out. He's losing the threads because he's realized I know what it all is and it's not that great. He's Faust. But once a chaotic element comes in and that has an aspect of myth and of the unknown and of magic or of some irrational, crazy thing, and then those two worlds combine into this unique language that allows him to navigate his life and cause things to come out of people's chests, then the world makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you give, like you Campbell would say, you create a new myth that satisfies what people are yearning for in the environment, in the reality that they're experiencing. Like if I give you Zeus and Hera and Freya and whatnot, it's gonna that doesn't work. I got iPods around me, so I got to give
iPod
you a
Nanos,
different.
yeah.
Yeah, I gotta you got to give people a different narrative, a different myth. So, and
I
it
think
doesn't have to
Nietzsche.
be textbooks. It has to be just like, okay, uh, this is a beautiful expression of the mechanics of how the world works. I can go with this. I can plant the crops and harvest the corn at the end of the year, and then go to the Bacchanalia in June, whatever, and be happy.
And and I think Nietzsche would say the Ubermensch is one who would not need anyone else's myth, but constantly, as an act of will, create a myth at every moment, a new myth that is fully sustaining, which
Mm,
is why he is the Ubermensch, because he doesn't need the past, he doesn't need values, he doesn't need morality. All he needs is his will and creation, the will and creativity to, at every moment, be creating the track that you then follow, that you go down. But the track is being created right in front of you because you're creating it.
yeah,
I'm picturing a train with a sort of track gun in front of it. It's shooting out track in front of it. Anyway, don't know why.
yeah.
That's yeah. Um,
Or no, it's like the Knights of the Round Table. Instead of going off into that was I think that's I forget which version of the Grail story it is, but they say, wouldn't it be now that we've seen the Grail and before we sit down to eat, it'd be a shame if we didn't go have an adventure first. And each of them set off into the darkest part of the forest where no trail had been cut, rather than going somewhere where an adventure had already been had. We're going to go create a new path. So, yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Well, no speed round this time, but maybe we can do it next time. I don't have a speed round prepared. But is there anything else we didn't talk about? I've exhausted my any notes that I had. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to bring up? And I think we covered a lot, or I think pretty thoroughly explored it.
Yeah, I think
Spiral
we put
symbol on
everybody
the
to
jet.
sleep.
I wrote that down. There's a spiral
Yeah.
symbol on the jet. Yeah.
Yeah, I had that too, but we got past it for sure.
Um, that's pretty much all I had. Anything else?
Um, Uh, oh, I thought when the teacher, when Mrs. Pomeroy, when she's her last scene, when she's exiting, I thought it was funny how she's carrying out the American flag with her,
Yeah, yeah.
symbolic of everything. I
Bush is
think
winning.
that, yeah, what like every positive ideal that the United States stands for is being kicked out along with the creative teacher that's trying to connect with people and provide them with
Yeah.
like new tools and
Your
she,
one hope, you're ejecting.
yeah, and it's funny, I think intentional that she has trouble getting the American flag out of the school, as though this rigid body of education is trying to keep that flag representing not the United States of America but representing uh, individualistic creativity, which could be anywhere in the world. It's just significant that this rigid structure is still trying to cling on and control that spirit of creativity, which she herself embodies as well. And it's just funny that she's having trouble getting it out of there. So,
Yeah. I wondered if that was intentional or sort of one of those happy accidents during production where she tripped and it's a good take because it looks
yeah,
pretty authentic, and then they used it. I was wondering about that. But that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting that what when you there's you have a shining light, you have a chance for redemption, and that's the first thing that you reject.
yeah,
Get my redemption out of my sight.
yeah.
Well, I think we covered a lot. So, Matt, we'll have to do another one of these soon, I hope.
This is another Jake Gyllenhaal movie, by the way.
Right, right. The other one we did was Enemy. So, those
Yeah,
still watching, check out our other stuff. We've done conversations on quite a few movies. We did Annihilation, we did Enemy, we did Joker, we've done Her, quite a few things. So check out the other episodes. If you want to support the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. Maybe hit the like button. That would be great. If you're listening elsewhere, if there's a like button or a follow button or a 5-star review somewhere, do that. And if you really want to support us, you can do so on our Patreon. So thanks a lot. And Matt, as always, great talking with you.
yeah, man. It's been a while. It's good to be back doing this with you.